Okay, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 175 with my guest, Noah Smit. Noah is from Ohio. He went to Oberlin, but Noah is a drum set player, percussionist in the steel band scene in Brooklyn. I've crossed paths with Noah for about a decade now in Brooklyn over the Labor Day sort of celebrations in Brooklyn around the steel pan scene. And he was the drummer for another steel band, and I would always sort of tip my hat at him and say hello, and we'd talk for 2 seconds. And I always was like, I want to reach out and hang with Noah, and I'm glad that we did it today. It was nice to sort of catch up. He is always wearing a Cleveland hat, so I always feel a little like I have another brother here in New York to fight against the New England sports teams. But Noah's an amazing guy. He is married to another steel drummer in the scene named Sparkle Deming, and it was just great to chat with Noah. He's a smart guy, a really good drum set player. So if you ever get a chance to hear him play, you should certainly do it. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I certainly did. Ladies and gentlemen, Noah Smit. Take care. Bye.
Tight for the most part. That the audience is really, you don't really notice the audience when you're watching it on TV. So not having the crowd there doesn't really make that much of a difference.
Well, one way or another, it's odd times. It's very strange times to be alive.
Of course.
Well, let's gavel this to order. Noah Smit, I appreciate you doing this. We've crossed paths for approximately 10 to 15 years in Brooklyn, one way or another at Panoramas. I think I started teaching at NYU 15 years ago, and then started getting involved through Kendall about 10 years ago, but had sort of like wandered to Brooklyn because I had heard there was a thing happening there, and when I first moved to New York, and you and I would sort of see you drumming, and I'd cross paths, and just a truth is that there's just not a lot of white people in the pan scene in general, and when you see one, and you're the only other one in the room, you're sort of like, wait, hey, I want to know that guy. And for 15 years, you and I like managed to just be two ships passing in the night. But we actually share a pretty common, other than the most obvious thing about us, we both have roots in some one way or another in Ohio, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
We both somehow managed to land in the steel band world or be exposed to that, having grown up in Ohio, despite all of the corn there somehow didn't keep out Trinidad in Ohio, Northeast Ohio anyway. And you're, aside from all that, you're a very good drummer, drum set player and calypso drummer. And I kind of wanted to just start today with like baby Noah, and I don't know your whole background where you grew up, so I don't want to assume you grew up in Ohio, but how did baby Noah get to living in Brooklyn and being a drummer for Panorama bands?
Okay. I'm actually from Oberlin, Ohio, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's just outside of Cleveland. And has it's famous for Oberlin College.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise it's a small town. I mean, like 8,000 people, small, Ohio Midwestern city. And I grew up there, and, that was really a blessing because Oberlin College, one, it's very progressive. Mm-hmm. So being exposed to that from a young age is great in terms of, instilling certain values in myself and gaining an appreciation for things that one might not be normally exposed to in the middle of Ohio. Multicultural things.
Is the town of Oberlin itself a progressive town, or is it the university itself that's progressive? I don't actually know.
The university, the college for sure, and the town is to a large degree, especially compared to other places around it. I mean, I don't mean to throw, cities under the bus. But right now it's kind of Trump territory out there, mm-hmm. for lack of a better word. But Oberlin is sort of an oasis in the middle of all of that.
It does. I mean, it's interesting when you think historic. I mean, just because not just identity politics, but just liberal left-leaning politics are getting so much airplay these days on social media, mm-hmm. and in the news. And again, it's great that voices are being heard, but the irony of like Oberlin being this liberal oasis or enclave in the middle of a state like Ohio, which I don't actually I mean, Ohio voted for Obama twice, so like
Right.
it is a complicated state, but
Yes.
Oberlin has always been a very uber liberal area relative to Ohio, regardless of what time period you sort of look at in Ohio history.
Absolutely. And, going back to, the 1800s, Oberlin was a stop on the Underground Railroad, a hotbed of abolitionism.
Hmm.
Um, so, I mean, that's just been part of the city's identity for forever. Um, and so, the college, I mean, there's a certain degree to which the city has that sort of liberal mindset. I mean, growing up, a lot of kids are talking about those freak college students, and but that's just bound to happen, especially
Yeah.
with young people in the Midwest who.
Well, what brought your parents to Oberlin? Are they from there as well, or they work there? Well, why were you born in
Um,
Oberlin?
Good question. Interesting question. Um, Both of my parents are from Northeast Ohio. My mother is from Lorain, which
Hmm.
is, the the namesake of Lorain County, which is the county that Oberlin's in. And my father, he moved around a bunch, but he's from sort of like central Ohio, like Ashland, around
Yeah.
there. I think he was born in Worcester, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken.
Hmm.
Um, but his father was a pilot in World War II, and then after the war, he became um, he was in the Air National Guard, Ohio Air National Guard in Mansfield, and he was also a flight instructor. So because of that, my father at a young age was moving around a bunch,
Did he
and
ever do any work
eventually,
at Wright Patterson?
no, I don't believe so. But I've been there a handful of times because I
Yeah.
used to be sort of an aviation buff as a little kid. So
Yeah.
I've been to that museum several times.
Did you ever like sit down and talk to your grandpa about World War II?
Of course,
I'm
because
jealous. I never did. I was so stupid.
right when you're at a young age, I mean, most normal young kids aren't thinking about World War II, but
Right.
I was a dork, so I was really
Fascism is
into.
not like a sexy topic when you're 8, or
Right,
even when you're
right.
16. It's not. It may be now, but it wasn't when I was a kid.
Oh, totally. And and you're in third grade and you're drawing like, like air battles between American, fighters and German fighters, and you're drawing the insignia on them. And I'm sure the teacher was looking over my shoulder, like, why is this kid drawing a swastika? I was like, no, it's just a German plane getting shot down by the
Like, you don't
Americans.
understand. Hermann Goering was a World War I pilot hero, and he ran the Luftwaffe. Like, you're explaining the entire history of
Right,
World War
right.
II.
I mean, it's just like I'm just being, period
Precocious. That's all.
specific or whatever. Yeah, but anyway, so I was totally into that stuff, and I used to talk to my grandfather about that. He was a P-51 reconnaissance pilot in the
Whoa.
war, so I mean, he was flying like over occupied Europe and taking photos at a high altitude and things like that. Very cool stuff. But he ended up flying jets after the war, and so long story short, my father ended up in Oberlin
Hmm.
because Oberlin also has a major FAA office there.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Okay.
so my grandfather landed a job there as an air traffic controller.
Oh.
Um, and so that's how that happened. But I mean, my father was, uh, and still is, but he doesn't play anymore, but a drummer as well.
Oh, okay.
And so he and his brothers and several friends had a few bands, in the late 60s, 70s or so. And so that's where I learned, that's who taught me how to drum, my father. And, I'm in sixth grade or, sixth grade, somewhere around there, I decided I wanted to start playing music. Um, I was really into Green Day.
Oh
I mean,
man.
that was the
Trey
time,
Cool. Are you kidding me?
1990.
Trey Cool changed every boy's age our life who had a drum set in their basement. We were just like whatever Trey Cool said, we did.
Exactly, exactly. And
No
I mean, I
questions
was
asked.
I was like 11 or 12, and Green Day got big, and they're just like the perfect music for a kid who's 11 or 12. Um, and so uh, I really decided I wanted to, start playing music. My dad taught me how to play guitar. He taught me how to play drums. He set up his old drum set in the basement, which was like, you know, John Bonham size Ludwig drum set with 26-inch kick drums and 20-inch floor toms. I mean, huge. And I'm this little kid trying to play it. But he taught me the basics of drumming, and so I got really involved in music, um, and I got really involved in playing punk music.
Mm.
I grew up basically listening to punk bands. Um, Green Day was sort of the first of that, if you would call them punk. A lot of
I don't even
purists
know. I
would
don't even know
sneer at
what
that.
the proper nomenclature is for these buckets of music genres
Buckets,
anymore.
yeah, these buckets of like niche musics. But anyway, um, so I got really into playing punk music and had a few bands. You know, mostly as the drummer because a small town. If you're the drummer, everybody wants you in their band. Because like every kid has a guitar, very few of them have a drum set.
Hmm.
So I ended up playing a lot through that. And when I got to high school now, I'm the freshman and I'm trying to be cool and get in with the cool kids and the cool seniors. And every Memorial Day in Oberlin, that's when Oberlin College has their um, graduation ceremony, and they have what's called illumination um, the Sunday of Memorial Day weekend. It's like a big town and gown sort of festival in the center, town square, and everything, and everyone comes out. And they put up like paper lanterns to light the way, hence the name illumination. And at the end of it, um, there's there's a concert that gets put on the steps of one of the main buildings in town, and that's where the Oberlin College Steel Band would play.
What year would this have been?
So I was a freshman, 97, 98.
Okay.
A freshman at Oberlin High School, not Oberlin College, Oberlin High School. And I was trying, like I said, I was trying to get in cool, the seniors, cool kids and stuff, and they're all saying, "Yeah, um, come to Illumination. The CAN Consortium is playing." And I'm thinking, what the hell is the CAN Consortium? That's such a weird name. What is that? So I go to check it out. I'm like, oh, it's these steel drum things. I've seen them. Everyone's seen them in some silly setting. Some ridiculous setting that doesn't really represent what it really is capable of.
Right.
I think the first time I had seen Steel Pan was in one of the Police Academy movies. They go to Miami and they're in the airport. There's a guy playing a pan in the airport. So I think that was the first time I'd ever seen a steel pan. So,
Hmm.
all the cool seniors and stuff are saying, "Yeah, come check out steel drum thing." So I check it out. And it was awesome. I knew nothing about the style of music. Um, but there was something about it that I really liked, and I thought it was cool. I liked the beat, the rhythm of it, and everything. Um, and so, fast forward, I ended up going to Oberlin College because I just didn't want to leave town.
Hmm.
It being such a homebody, I never left the state of Ohio until I was 18. So like I was just like stuck. I'm not stuck, but like didn't really want to venture out too far. So I said, what, I'll go to Oberlin College. It's a good school. A lot of great ideas, good music there. Obviously, they have a music conservatory.
Hmm.
So I found that interesting. So I go to the school and I put um, they had like this is the early days of the internet, 2000, 2001. And I put a little ad on their online classified saying I wanted to drum for a punk band. I wanted to start a punk band. There's so many talented people, you know, at Oberlin College, I could start a band. And someone from the Steel Band, which at that point they had changed their name from CAN Consortium to Oberlin Steel, hit me up and said, "Well, our drummer just graduated. We need a drummer."
Mm.
I'm like, "Oh, these guys, yeah, let me check it out." And I went and did that, and got in the band. Apparently, partly because I owned a truck at the time, and they needed someone
You're the
to
Lars
help
Ulrich. You're the
them.
Lars Ulrich of the Oberlin Steel Band. Like, didn't they?
Right,
Have you ever seen my kind of, or what was it? Some kind of monster.
some
The
kind of monster years ago. Yeah.
where James Hetfield's like, the only reason we hired you, Lars, is because you owned the amps. Like
Oh
this really
yeah.
like tense moment between he and James, and he's like, "You're not even a good drummer. Your dad just bought these amps, so we let you in the group, you idiot." Like, and you're just
Yeah.
watching, like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you just said that." But I don't know. Sometimes it's true.
That whole movie was very much an oh my god, I can't believe you just said that moment. Gosh, it's been so long since I've seen
Well,
that. But anyway,
let me ask you
go ahead.
who at Oberlin though, like and man, my ignorance of the Oberlin the history of the Oberlin steel band lineage there is something that for one reason or another, I just didn't. It's crazy to me that I can be at the University of Akron and there's such a strong pan program lineage there, and then you can look up that the first performance by a Trinidadian steel band at Avery Fisher Hall was accompanied with the Oberlin Steel Orchestra in 1986.
Oh wow, I
Like
didn't even know that.
I mean, I just looked it up the other couple weeks ago because I was talking to one of the guys in Jason, about like, man, when the pandemic happened and we started just sort of being like, I don't know, fuck it, like all of a sudden nobody can sit. You can't seat anybody closer than 6 feet from each other. So now we can sell out the Met Opera. Like we don't. We're not worried about this anymore. Like fuck it, we should get the BSO and Skiffle Bunch to like team up and do something with together, and so percussion we'll just we'll do something else and we'll co-present it, Carnegie Hall. And I was just like, that'd be great. I mean, who cares now? And I looked it up
Right.
and I was like, god damn it, Oberlin and Exodus beat us to the punch like 40 years ago at Avery
Uh,
Fisher Hall.
oh, I did know about that. Yeah, now that you mentioned it, I have read about that. Yeah, yeah, Exodus and
Anyway, it's pretty. But
Oberlin.
my question is, so but the reason I ask that is because clearly, if the connection, it's not like Oberlin got together and like met up with the Pan All Stars from Des Moines, Iowa, and played at Carnegie. They had a clear connection to one of the biggest bands in Trinidad. So who had that connection, or who at Oberlin was sort of driving the bus there?
I have no idea because one of the things about Oberlin, the steel band at Oberlin College, that is unique and which is really cool, and which I really love about them, is that they're not faculty run at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's purely student run. Back in those days, I'm not really sure if if there was some faculty member who might have had more of
Mm.
a hand in things, but during my time there, it was purely student run. I mean, you had like a faculty advisor just for just as a technicality, but I mean they were completely hands off. Um, and so I don't really know
Like
who
who
that might have
who built
been.
the drums?
Okay, good question. So going back to the history of the band, it was actually formed by people who went to Oberlin, who in high school had played in a steel band called Calliope's Children, that was formed by, his name is Jimmy Lydon, I think. You
Mm-hmm.
might have heard of him. I mean, he's like a Carl Chase sort of, early figure in steel band in America, outside of the Caribbean diaspora in America. So he had this little high school steel band, and several other members went to Oberlin and said, "Hey, you're here. Let's start playing again." And I believe their first set of instruments were built by Ellie,
Mm.
Ellie Manette. Um, and sure enough, some of those instruments were still there. I mean, this is like 1980 when they formed, and some of those instruments were still there when I joined in 2001,
Yeah.
which speaks to the craftsmanship of the net band. Um, so by the time I joined the band, they had a bunch of older pans, which were made by Ellie. Some of them were made by Cliff Alexis. Basically, people roughly in the area at the time, in the time before the internet,
Yeah, I mean,
but
one of the reasons I ask is like there's only really, I mean, there's many, many, many Trinidadian pantuners who live in the United States, but in terms of people who are making large batches of drums to suit an entire steel band or outfit an entire steel band at that time period, there was Cliff Alexis in DeKalb or
mm-hmm,
St. Paul, Minnesota, out in the upper northwest part of the
yeah,
Midwest, and then Ellie in Morgantown. There, of course, were folks in Brooklyn. Leary Harrigan was in. I mean, but Roland Harrigan. But in terms of working at universities, those were the two main people that sort of supplied a lot of those early programs. In Oberlin, it's just weird that Northeast Ohio. It's like maybe because Northeast Ohio just sort of like is the river that runs between DeKalb and Morgantown. Everything just sort of ran there.
maybe
The
could
sediment
be.
sort of settled there, but it's such a strange, like, of all the places in the world, Northeast Ohio somehow managed to just be a net that caught a shitload of steel drums and steel drum education.
Yeah, and again, as you said, like there's a lot of it, but not as much interaction between. I mean, I never saw the Akron band myself until I think 2004.
Yeah.
I went, because I mean, by that point, that was my junior year of college, and I was like obsessed. That was it. You know, when I first joined Oberlin Steel, I was like, okay, this is cool, but you know, I don't know, I don't know. Because the other thing about it too, because it's student run, um, from year to year, it could be totally different.
Yeah.
You know, every year they
Even when it's
elect
not
these.
student run, year to year is completely
Right.
different. You
So
know.
could you imagine when it's student run, there's very little continuity in terms
Yeah.
of leadership. Um, and so, you know, when I first joined, in terms of repertoire and approach to the music, it wasn't what would eventually be what really got me hooked on steel pan. You know, it was just sort of more of just like a party vibe. Like, you know, let's just
Mm,
hang out and drink some beers and
right.
you know, drink some Steel Reserve because it has steel in the name, and you know, hang out and have fun.
Because irony meant more to you than quality at that
I
point.
mean, listen, that's a very postmodern thing, irony. But
PBR being
anyway,
a beer that you could buy for $8 in a bar in Brooklyn. I'm like, oh, I know what you're paying for. Irony.
but yeah, and so you know, by like the second or third year of me being in the band, I got really into it. Partly because you know, in they called it the pan yard, but you know, it has commensurate with the steel
Hmm.
pan language, called it the pan yard, but really it's a basement in an abandoned building on the Oberlin campus,
Hmm.
which was very punk rock. I mean, coming from a punk rock background, I loved the sort of maverick approach to music that steel pan is, whether it's a steel band in Trinidad or, you know, this sort of hodgepodge group at Oberlin College, you know, fancy Oberlin College with you know, all of these resources at their disposal in the musical world, and this steel band is subsisting underneath an abandoned swimming pool. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
Um,
It is the
so,
original. I mean, it's the original sort of. I mean, punk rock. I don't. Have you read this book called "Our Band Can Be Your Life"
of
by
course.
Michael Azerrad? Like, it's
Oh, yeah.
this steel band. Steel drums, in particular, are like historically a punk reaction to oppression and you know group conformity and all of the things that punk. I mean, I'm not a punk rocker, but like what little I know about it and the way song structures were formed, the way the instruments were built, the way the reason that punk rock music is a lot of those early like Minutemen tunes were like 45 seconds long is because they
Yeah.
set up and could only play as long until the police came. And so they
Right.
would set up and be like, rah, and rage. And in about a minute, the cops would show up because somebody called. And then they would tear down and run. And it's like, so when it all makes sense when you look at it in a larger context. In the steel
Sounds like
drum,
a sounds like a panorama practice in Brooklyn, doesn't it? The
it's
police show
sure.
up and shut it down. Every time that
except
happens, I get like nostalgic. I'm like, oh, this reminds me of high school, you
Except
know?
they've reacted and gone the other way. Rather than a 45-second long tune, they're like, well, we're going to
Right.
do a 10-minute long tune. This is going to
Right.
be we're going to make you have patience here.
Right.
Where was it for you? When in Oberlin for you? Like I know for me, I mean, I grew up playing steel drums in high school. Like I said with Joan Wenzel, I'm very fortunate. I played at Ohio State for a couple years, and then I transferred to Akron. And the program there, Larry, it was like part of your studies. It was taken very seriously. But it wasn't really until I went to Trinidad when it finally like it had always been biting me in the ass. Like, hey, I'm here, and this is interesting and awesome. And then I went to Trinidad, and I was like, oh, my first time
Yeah.
out of, and maybe if I had been studying Geel Geel and went to Ghana for the first time, I might have the same feeling I do about steel drums. But that moment imprinted on me in a way that like trauma does for people, like where you can't, like no matter what you do, you like if you've been in a car wreck, you can't turn left without
Right.
having terrifying anxiety.
Right.
And so, but for me, in a good way, I just can't go through my world without seeing everything in the context of that moment as a 19-year-old kid in Trinidad. So for you, what was that sort of started to turn your eyes towards like taking this a little bit more seriously?
Yeah, so in the aforementioned pan yard, if you will, um, like buried underneath, you know, all the crap they had sitting around in there, were a couple of CDs of steel pan music from Trinidad, and like part of practice and working on a rep. I mean, granted, like they played songs like Pan in A minor and
Mm-hmm.
The Hammer and things like that, but there wasn't as much of an effort to get everyone interested in where those songs come from, what they mean, um, the context of them, things like that. So, and I mean, like, we're playing like pen and A minor, verse and chorus, things like that.
Hmm.
And I'm like, this song is cool, whatever. And then I come across the CD in the Panyards, Steel Bands of Trinidad and Tobago. And it's a Sanch recording. Sanch is the company that records really big panorama orchestras in Trinidad. And so I took it home and I listened to it because
Was it Ice Records? Is that the label?
no, I think that one was on Delos.
Oh yeah, Delos. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Delos and
Delos.
Ice were like the two. Like Ray Funk wrote all of the liner notes for Ice
Yeah,
Records, and like that's where
yeah.
I heard my like you buy all the Steel Band is Beautiful competition recordings
Mm-hmm.
are on Ice. Like those are amazing.
Ray Funk is a legend, by the
Yeah.
way. But we'll get to that later. Um, but yeah, so I popped the CD in because the first song on it is this little bootsy sharp, simple song called Sunset. I mean, it's just like just one of those songs
Hmm.
Bootsy would just like throw out while he was playing and probably forget it because
Hmm.
that's just kind of the mind Bootsy has, just like music flows from it. So I listened to that. I'm like, okay, Sunset, this is how you're really supposed to play it. And I'm listening to the drummer too. I'm really paying attention to the drummer. I'm like, oh, that's the groove the drummer is doing. Okay, I'll remember that for when we play it,
Hmm.
when Overland Skill plays it next practice. And so I see the next track is Pan in A minor by Amico Renegades. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, why does it say it's 9 minutes and 54 seconds? You know,
Like ours is only two and a
yeah,
half minutes long. What the hell?
exactly. So I put it in, and I'm just like, whoa, because first of all, I mean, we're talking about 120 players or 100 players or whatever, and it's just like, I don't know. I mean, you know how it is. I don't know
Hmm.
about the people who listen to your podcast or are familiar with steel orchestras and how they sound, but there's something really visceral to it, even on a recording.
Hmm.
Um, and so I put that in, and I was just blown away. I was like, "This is awesome!" There's so much going on, and again, I'm listening to the drummer in as much as you could pick out the drummer amongst 100 players, and he's doing this, and he's changing to like a rock backbeat where he's bashing on the cymbal and stuff, and that sort of spoke to me. Um, and so from then on, I was hooked. You know, I, you know, I started seeking out more and more steel band music and reading about Panorama, the competition, uh, and, and really got into it. So fast forward a couple of years, and I organized to go to Brooklyn, take part in the Panorama competition here in 2004, um, and that was it. As you say, that was the moment. Where you take that left turn, and it's always there. You know,
Hmm.
um, and I played with actually played with two bands that summer, just because I wanted to experience,
Hmm.
the different styles and so on. I played with two bands, Pantonic, um, whose arranger at the time was Clive Bradley, and I feel really fortunate to have been able to play with Clive, who was a
That's
very good guy.
hilarious to me, dude. That your first time playing with a band in Brooklyn was with one of the most legendary Trinidadian arrangers of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I figured like go
Yeah.
for it. And so I, played for Bradley, and then I also played for Sonatas because my another friend from Oberlin who lived in New York, we both sort of decided like we're going to go to New York and play for Panorama, but I really wanted to go play for Bradley, so I went on that path. And my friend, he just sort of, as he says, it sort of like randomly picked a name out of the phone book, and he ended up at Sonatas. And I was like, yeah, I'll play there too, because I really liked the music. The arranger there was a guy named Johann Popwell, and that was his first year arranging in New York for Sonatas, and we won. Pantonic, incidentally, came second to last. That was like the worst they ever did with Bradley. That was an off year of off years. So between the two bands, I pretty much came, you want to average it out. Um, so the following winter, which would be January of 2005, I went to Trinidad. That was my first time playing in Trinidad. I played for Renegades, the JIT.
Hmm.
So, I was really I was aiming high to play with all these people. Now, mind you, I wasn't playing drum set.
Hmm.
I'm a noob. I'm still too shitty on drum set to really hack it on the panorama stage. I was playing Scratcher. I was like, you know what? Any way to get into a rhythm section and to see how it works and to like be exposed to it firsthand, um, be part of that living organism that is the engine room of the steel orchestra. So I was like, I'll just infiltrate with a little Scratcher, get in there and feel it, and just sort of pay attention, scope out what the drummer is doing, and so on and so forth. Um, and so that's what I did in Trinidad that year. And after that, I mean, forget it. It was a wrap. I mean, the thing was in my blood, and as a lot of people will say, like it gets in your blood like a disease. It doesn't let go. I guess that's really a shitty thing to say these days, but
I
you
mean,
know, I feel
I
like
understand. I know what you're
catches on.
saying. No, I mean, I know what you're saying, but I mean, to me, I would take it even a step further to agree with you that it gets in you, in your, like you said, in your blood, and but in a way that for me personally, I don't know. I don't know whether it's that it's a relatively new art form historically, just in terms of the way history works. Like the violin's just been around for way longer, and so
Right.
my ability to understand the sort of the roots of where the violin came from as a folk instrument, and the types of foods that you would have been associated with the violin and the music that was played within the woods with bands of people traveling, like no, like these are instruments that have roots somewhere, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now we see them in the context of the Concertgebouw or Cleveland Orchestra or whatever, and they're like,
Right.
look at these things, and you can study, and this one is a Stradivarius, and it's worth $18 million, and you're like, that's fantastic. What did the Black Plague smell like whenever
Right.
that instrument was being made? Like those are interesting things too. The steel drum, I think, is just so new that we just, I mean, not that it hasn't isn't happening, but it's almost impossible to detach it from everything else, which
Of
is the
course.
music, which is the not just the steel band music, with the soca music. You go to Trinidad, everybody's car windows are rolled down, and the latest socas are all bumping out, and it's the same five tunes. You
Yeah.
cannot go to Trinidad and participate in Panorama and not walk out of that country singing one of those five tunes on repeat in your head. You can't go to a pan yard, even in Brooklyn, hardly without somehow having corn soup forced down your throat. You can't rehearse in a steel band without being forced at the end, and when I say forced, I mean in a good way, to say a group prayer with each other.
Yeah.
Like, so you have religion, and it's like not everybody there's Christian.
Right.
Like there's Hindus, there's Muslims, there's Jews, like they're all, and there's atheists, like agnostics, they're all in there, and you know what? They're all saying the prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And to
Mm-hmm.
me, there's something that, I've told my bandmates this, and so that I think one of the, like right now, if I had to have a choice, somebody said you have to choose one musical community to be a part of for the rest of your life, and it's the pan community or the new music community with so. I mean, it's not even close.
Right.
I mean, and not that I don't love Steve Reich or John Cage or any of them. Not that I don't think the stuff that so does isn't important. It's just when you talk about a community, there's something inherently built into the steel band that it's not without complications. It's not without politics. It's not without all the other shit.
Totally.
But it's woven in a way that you can't kick someone out of the team because they disagreed with you on politics, or they disagreed with you on the way a phrase should be played, or they disagreed with you on the type of hot sauce you use on your food. Like, no, you take it all. There's problems, but, and to me that's very attractive. And I've always, every time I walk into a pan yard, whether it be in Trinidad or Brooklyn, I'm like, this is the year I'm going to be convinced that I'm wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
god damn it, every year I'm just like, fuck. Like, and I just don't feel that way when I walk into PASIC in
Yeah.
Indianapolis, or and I go to like a big chamber music concert or something. I love what's happening. I clearly do chamber music for a living, but why can no one in this room tell me why I don't feel as comfortable and safe and healthy in this room as I do when I'm in a pan yard?
Hmm.
Answer that question for me. And maybe, yeah, listen, I got my own personal bullshit, so I'm projecting some of that onto the situation, but I'll stand by it to a certain degree as it pertains to the steel band and what you can gain from it. in terms of a worldview, in terms of learning how to work with large amounts of people very
Oh yeah.
quickly. And then, too, the hot button thing. I mean, we've joked a little bit. I've joked a little bit about you and I being a minority in the scene, but
Right.
right now, I think if white people want to understand what it feels like to be on the other side of the coin, go to a pan yard.
Hmm.
Not because you'll feel terrible or because anybody will look at you strange in a bad way, but just you need to be in a room where you're two of the 140.
Yeah.
That's crucial. It's really crucial, and I'm really fortunate to have had it from when I was like 19. Like Larry
Right.
Snyder and Bugsy and Cliff were like, "Go, do this. If you don't, you're a fool." And
Hmm.
I think a lot of people just haven't had that, and that's and I don't know. I don't have a question here. It's just an observation I've been making.
That's a good observation to make. I mean, growing up, again, I've always, been very progressive. My parents raised me right. I'll just say it like that. Um, and especially when it comes to matters of race,
Hmm.
racism and uh, things like that. Um, but still, I mean, when you are one, like the only or one of two, um, in a situation like that, it's kind of a shock at first, but as you say, it's an important thing to do. It's definitely important. Um, and like you, I did that early, relatively early,
Yeah.
at the age of 20 to 21 or so. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't really have anything to say to it either.
I don't either. I've had enough conversations with friends and family members, coworkers who talk about like they talk about not just just the tenor of the conversation is like it's so easy to fix all of this. It's so easy just to be an anti-racist. I'm like, okay, have you ever been in a pan yard when four cops walk in and walk right by you and go to
Right.
the line of double tenor players who are all 13 years old? And I'm the guy with a bag full of weed, probably. Like, that's right at my feet. Like,
Yeah.
that's systemic racism. And I want you to know that it's not as easy to topple it as you think it is. When they walk in that room, if I, as the only white guy in the room, all of a sudden start like throwing myself on the grenade and making a big deal out of it, I've done that, and
Hmm.
it's awkward and weird, and I don't know. Like it's just not as simple, and it's just like you need to be in the yard when this happens. You need to understand that cops will walk right by me just because of the color of my skin. That's it.
I remember a long time ago being at a yard, um, with a couple of my friends because every summer, a bunch of my, not a bunch, but a handful of my friends from Oberlin who I played with,
Hmm.
they'll come and play in whatever band I'm in. So that's been a tradition. So one summer, and I mean like 2005 or 2006, three or four of us, we were just after practice, or practice didn't happen for whatever reason. So we just drove around Brooklyn, checked out other bands. And we were at one yard, and these NYPD guys came up and they looked at us. They're like, what the hell are you doing here? I mean, this yard is in Canarsie or somewhere, like over by the terminal market. And cops are like, what are you guys doing here? You looking for drugs? Get the hell out of here. Like, nah, dude. Like, clearly there's something cool going on. Check out the music right in front of you. Like, I don't know. It, it's a weird thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just again, yeah, man, I didn't have a question there, so I'm not expecting you to have an answer. It's just, it's something I think right now that it's even more acutely, I'm more acutely aware of it given the pandemic and the inability for us all safely to get together and do panorama, even when it's raining and the judges, you know, a couple years ago when we had to do panorama outside the stage,
Right.
it's like even in
Right.
those years where it's just chaos and everybody thinks we shouldn't do it ever again and I'm going to boycott next year, even in those terrible down years, I'm still now in this year where we're not even allowed. I just am like, oh man, I'd give my
Oh yeah.
left leg to have that drama right now,
Totally. Like
because
yesterday, I'm sitting here after that storm blew through. The tropical storm remnants, and it got nice out afterwards. And I'm thinking, like, man, if panorama was on, I'd be going to practice right now. Like I'd be sitting here watching the storm, sort of peter out, not really amount to anything. It's like, man, I guess practice is on. Like that's the kind of mindset you get into this time of year, and it's weird to not have it,
Yeah.
um, to have that happening. But
Well, let me ask you,
yeah,
just to change gears a little bit here.
yeah,
What when you drum for Panorama? I was talking with, I did a podcast. I'm really close with Jerry on, obviously,
right.
and you know that. But it's interesting to talk to him about his approach to Panorama drumming. I'm curious for you when you're sitting down to drum with a band. What do you feel? And I'm sort of asking. I'm asking a question to which I suspect I know the answer. But like, what for you are the biggest like boxes you are going to check? Like you number one, you need to learn like what are the low pans hitting, what are the high pans like for you, what are the boxes you're looking for when you sit down back there that you feel are going to best help the band and the arranger's music do what you think they need it to do?
Got you. Um, the answer could kind of differ from arranger to arranger because some of them are more hands off in terms of
Uh-huh.
the drumming, or some know exactly what they want. They themselves might be a drummer, or some of them um, know what they want but don't know how to express it. So I'm sort of like stuck trying to figure it out. I'm not going to name names, but I guess what I'm referring to with each of those. Um, the boxes I check, one, obviously learning the song like bulletproof inside and out. Because when you're in the rhythm section, as I'm sure you know, very often you can't hear shit.
You
All
hear
you
white
hear,
noise. It's just
you hear, you hear the rhythm section. That's all
uh,
you hear. So you don't really have a frame of reference of what's going on in the song, which um, makes it really difficult. You have to internalize the music, especially as the drummer, because as the drummer, and this is the next box that I would check. Um, you're sort of responsible. You shouldn't be, but you are responsible for everyone else in the rhythm section knowing what to do. Um, Again, that differs from band to band. I mean, when I played at Renegades back in the day, from the drummer to the scratcher to the tambourine to the Iron Man, they knew that song like
mm,
inside and out. But since then, I've been in and played in more bands where you're drumming and you have to turn around and say, "Hey, hey, hey!" and yell at the guys to get their attention to let them know there's a stop coming up or a crescendo
yeah.
or a phrase, a set of drops or whatever. Um, so you kind of have to be a team leader in that sense.
You're like the
And
catcher on a baseball field. I mean, everybody's got to know how many outs there are. Even if they all know, you're still going to say it.
yep, 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 yep. Um, and that's a pain in the ass because when you're drumming, I mean, drumming is very physical, and the last thing you want to be doing is lifting one hand to get people's attention or turning around to yell. You want to play your part. You want to do your little fill or set up that stop or set up the phrase
Yeah.
that you're cueing those guys into to begin with. Um, that's another box to check. Playing as loud as humanly possible. You know, Making sure you're heard. That's one challenge with drumming when there's 100 or 120 other people also playing some form of percussion. Um,
Do you tune your drums differently with panorama drumming in order to sort of help you project and come through?
that's something that I'm still experimenting with. I think part of that is because I haven't had a good baseline with which to work because, from band to band, there's a lot of variety in terms of drum set. I've had to do a lot of drum set surgery in Panyards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like in New York, being able to use my own kit or whatever, generally I try to, I like to have the kick drum be thumpy. Um, but that's because that's how I've always played it. I don't like to tinker with the kick drum tension a lot because if it's too high, then to me it just feels messed up. But the toms, tune them a little higher because obviously they need to project, and the snare um, often is just crank the shit out of it. You know, right before the point that starts to choke out. But I can't claim to be any sort of tuning
Well,
guru.
it's. I've asked Jerry and I pick his brain a bunch too, but it's interesting just the sonic quality of a steel band. When you step back 10, 15 feet from the band, everything just because of the nature of acoustics, like everything sort of gets compressed into this mid range, like you know low to mid, and then or low mid and
Hmm.
then high mid, and everything's in there, and you really have to have mics placed in order to hear proper amplification for the bass because the bass sounds are so diffuse. In order to hear the drums at all, you got to have mics back there. But Jerrion cranks his drums and his snare and all of his toms way up, and
Hmm.
his kick drum way down low to sort of
Right.
like bookend the sound of, you know, the sound of the band, because otherwise
Hmm.
you're just in that chaos and nothing comes through. You know, if your snare drum
Oh,
is
yeah.
tuned in the middle range and it's getting swallowed up by the double seconds, you know, it doesn't matter what you do there. It doesn't matter what line you're trying to accent or point out. You're just getting buried by default.
And especially toms. I mean, if the toms are tuned low, forget it. Like the cellos are going to eat you up, you know. And a lot of it is too. You know, you want to sort of accentuate the attack. You need that sort of high register attack of everything to just sort of cut through a little more. But again, I can't profess to be an expert. I mean, it's still something that I still experiment with. If I was in the pan yard tonight, I'd be messing with my tuning, trying to get it right. And that's just, I mean, Jerry you know, he'll play at several bands in a season, so I think at this point he's really developed a uh, good tempo.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
let me ask, what advice, just to sort of, you know, we're about 50 minutes in here, and I don't want to take too much more of
right?
your time, but like, what advice would you have for some? Let's say there's a baby Noah right now growing up in a cornfield in Oberlin, and or in some other, let's say, you know, Wyoming, and feels like they have an interest in doing something like you're doing. You know, they
Mm-hmm.
see you drumming, right? I mean, the difference between you and me and them now is that like they now have YouTube videos of you and Jerrion and everybody else playing with steel bands. I didn't have that. The first
Right.
person I ever saw drumming with a steel band was in Trinidad in person. Like,
Was it Killer?
the
Because you were at
drummer.
Phase Two,
I was in
right?
phase
In
two,
2003.
2002. Two.
Oh, 2002.
Do what you want. I
Do what you
don't.
want. Was it Bailey? Richard Bailey?
Man, I don't know.
Older?
Older
Because
guy.
that guy's a boss.
It was an older guy, I believe. The main sort of iron guy is a guy named Mikey. That's who
Oh,
I knew
okay.
there mostly. But
Oh, that would have.
like, you know, you
Yeah.
couldn't be like, what's it like to play a soca tune and like look it up on YouTube, and now they can. So
Right.
there's just a little bit more access and information for folks. So if there's a young student out there, or maybe even a college student who's like, man, I see what Noah's doing, I want to do that. What
Hmm.
would you suggest be the first email they send in order to, or the first recording they check out, the first sort of thing they do to get on that journey? I
Oh,
know that,
man.
like, you know, your journey is a pinball sort of butterfly effect of a million different influences, but
Right.
there is a point at which somebody has to take the step in their own hands and make a phone call or send an email. What would you recommend for somebody who wants to learn more about this stuff?
Whew, boy, that's tough. I mean, for me, and again, this kind of doesn't apply because, as you say, people have so many resources. You know. But even so, I mean, listen to a lot of the music. For me, it really, I think, helped to listen to like Pan A minor, Renegades Pan A minor,
Mm-hmm.
and sit there and listen really hard to figure out what the drummer is doing, and then, you know, a year later realize, oh shit, that's a drummer and a timbales player. And the timbales player is taking a lot of the shots, and oh wow, the drummer also is the guy just playing a side tom. So I guess, like, you know, if you can find videos on YouTube, that's a great thing to do. I mean, obviously, a lot of drummers are much more accessible now,
Mm-hmm.
because of social media. Last week, Lardell Lewis, uh, of Snarky Puppy, he also drummed in Panorama in
Yeah.
Toronto for Pan Fantasy, and he did a video on his Facebook talking about his experience. I mean, things like that. The fact that things like that exist is pretty amazing.
Man.
Um, but to me, I think it's kind of cliche at this point with any musician. But listen, listen, listen. You know, just
I don't think that's cliche at all. I think that's just like, I
it
don't
works.
know, like, what advice do you have for somebody to keep their teeth clean? I don't know, something on a regular daily basis. What recommendation do you have, Noah? I don't know, brush your
Well,
teeth.
right,
Every
exactly,
morning, brush your teeth. Like, that's
exactly.
cliched advice too, Noah, but it's really fucking good advice.
It's cliche because it's true. You
Right.
know,
Cliches are called cliches for a reason. There's a whole shitload of truth in there.
Um, I mean, I would say things I wish I had done. I
Mm.
wish I had focused more on proper technique.
Mm.
Growing up as a punk drummer, you sort of eschew technique, technicality, things like that. And, I've developed bad habits as a drummer
Well,
that
you
are
can't
really hard
rage
to break.
against you can't rage against the machine and then be like, can you show me how to properly do that? Properly rage against the
Right.
machine.
But I mean, even like holding a drumstick properly, I
Mm.
grew up holding a drumstick like, you know, like, like with the butt inside my palm. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
obviously you're supposed to hold it further down. And once I learned that and I started practicing with that more, it opened up a lot more doors just in terms of dynamics and things like that. You know, just I think, especially playing in a big steel orchestra like this, proper technique is very important. I think proper technique comes natural to um, some drummers, to some like myself, not necessarily. So I've had to work on it, but it helps in terms of reducing fatigue. I mean, oh God, you're practicing 5 hours a night. Excuse me, 5 hours a night every night. You want to learn how to minimize the amount of effort you put out.
You're not just rehearsing. You're not playing like your soft snare drum roll for 5 hours a night. You're hitting as hard as you can for 5 hours a night.
Right, you're going at at 100, and then all of a sudden someone hits the side of the pan, and you have to go from 100 to 0 like that, and then go from 0 to 100 again all night long. It's and as you know, being a driller, it's a crazy, crazy, crazy sort of regimen. So I think
It's something as a driller I have to be very careful of because you have the person working the hardest is the drummer, physically speaking.
yes,
And maybe second to that is like a bass player. In terms of
right,
like the amount of real estate somebody has to cover when playing,
hmm
those two
hmm
instruments are just moving, doing the most physical activity. And so yeah, it's like you have to pace that out because if you're doing something that requires Jerry on or you to just like rage for 30 seconds at your peak RPM, and I'm just like, no, let's just loop that. Let's just rehearse that over and over and over again for 2.5 hours. Like I'm gonna burn you out, and
oh, yeah.
then I'm gonna actually ruin everything for the rest of the week. Like so, it's a tricky thing. I mean, how open are as a young student, I was afraid to ask to shadow people. Like, let's say I wanted
hmm
to become a soca drummer, and my life's dream was to drum for a Panorama Steel band.
hmm
My advice to that student would be to be like, all right, go stand behind one.
right.
Like, so how open would you be, or would a steel band be to like a random total stranger contacting you and saying, no, I'd like to work with you, or just shadow you just to know what this is like? What does that look like for somebody?
It looks like nothing right now.
Let's
it's
say
so
in
hard.
2021, hopefully,
Right.
theoretically speaking, in 2021, what does this look
Yeah.
like for somebody?
I mean, that's totally cool. Although honestly, I'd probably just tell them, man, I'm still a dude. Go talk to Jerry on. Go talk to Gregory. Hit up Leeson. Foster. One of those guys, like the real bosses. I'm still. I mean, yeah, I'm a kid from Ohio doing it, but I would totally defer to Jerry on because to be honest, I'm still doing that shit myself. I go to Panorama, I still stand behind Jerry on and watch him, or stand behind Leeson or Killer, any of these guys who I look up to on the regular. You know,
Yeah.
a couple years ago, um, well, I played for Despers USA in Panorama up here, and we go with two drummers, which is awesome. I love it. I love playing with another drummer. Never done it before in any setting, which I'm sure you have.
I've
It's
never
it's
drummed with two drum. I mean, never a drum set. Like I've never played drum set along with somebody else in that context.
it's awesome. I highly recommend it, especially for Panorama, because one, obviously you could sort of dial it down a little bit. You don't have to go at 100 because now it's 200% between the two of you. But when you lock in with another drummer, because the way we do it, there's two approaches you could take. Either you could basically clone each other, or you could do something complementary, like one drummer just kind of keeps the beat, the other one does all the flashy stuff on top, which is an approach that some bands take. But at Despers, it's myself and this guy Gregory, who is like a legend of just drumming in general in Trinidad. They call him Animal, or at least they used to. I don't really hear that anymore, but that was his nickname for a long time. But he's just a boss, and I learned so much drumming with him. Um, there was one part where it was like a run and then a couple of hits, and to get to the hits, they're like quarter note hits, like dun 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 dun, that sort of thing. And we get to the hits, and I'm like, man, why is Gregory pulling back? Like, why is he pulling back the tempo so much? And I realized he wasn't pulling back shit. I was pushing ahead naturally every time we got to that. The quarter notes, they kind of want to jump forward. I'm speaking about quarter notes and cut time, not.
Yeah.
They have, you sort of want to like push forward with that. So he was keeping me in line, and like that right there was a good learning experience. But being able to, just in general, like sink in with him and play the same thing as him and get that sort of connection and that back and forth with someone who I've looked up to as a drummer for years. That was awesome. That was better than 4 years of college.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I every time Jerry comes to town, I try to, when we can teach in person, have students of mine who are playing the panorama at NYU, or
Right.
playing the kit. I'm just like, you got to just sit in the room with Jerry. Like, I'm not gonna. You just need to know what it feels like to play with somebody like him. Just listen, and I don't listen to like his like like any of the like I don't his.
Right.
What I'm not impressed with Jerry by is his fast hands. What I'm impressed by is the depth of sound and his unwavering quest to just keep the beat so forgettably solid, like that you don't even notice he's there. And like those two things, if Jerry had one arm and one foot, I would still probably hear the same intention, and thus I wouldn't need more. Like, because at the top of his list is like energy and sound, like, and like energy and time and the sound he's bringing, the quality, like the depth of sound he's bringing. And in Skiffle Bunch this year, there's a guy named Shaquille who's a badass drummer, Shaquille Forbes, mainly a seconds player within Skiffle. He plays lead as well, but monster seconds player. And he sat in and played drums this past year, and and Shaquille is like a pipe cleaner. He's like super tiny, like super skinny, and but super good. He gets back there, and about an hour into the 5-hour rehearsal, I look back, and Shaquille just is like prone, like flat out laying on the ground, like I can't keep up with him. Like there's only a certain, like Jerry there's just a sound he gets that I think it was clear to Shaquille's like, oh yeah, I'll get there. I just not this year. And like I'm gonna have to adjust in order to be able to hang with Jerry. And it taught me a lot, like to watch, and Shaquille could play circles around me, but to watch him, like it taught me. I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly how I'd feel. I'm gonna learn by watching you go through this torture what I would go through if I was sitting back there. But I think as a student, if you have an interest to play in a panorama steel band, there are very few places in the world where you can know exactly what that's like. Trinidad is one, Brooklyn is one, London is one, Toronto is one, Miami is one, and
small islands as well.
sorry, I'm talking about like in terms of where
outside of the Caribbean.
Outside of the Caribbean, those are the big. Of course, like the Virgin Islands, all the way down. Every island, to some degree, has some connection or does relate to it in some way. But in terms of like where there's a carnival and anywhere from a 60 to 140 piece steel band congregating in a parking lot, those 5 or 6 places I listed are sort of like within your reach.
Right.
But there's not many others. You have to go there, You
got to go there. And New York is great. Brooklyn is great for it, even though obviously steel pan here faces many, many challenges. First and foremost being real estate. Brooklyn is awesome because there's such an attitude to it. I played in Panorama in Trinidad. I played here in Brooklyn, obviously. I played in St. Lucia. And each one has its own sort of vibe to it. In Brooklyn's, it just has a different attitude. What I like about Brooklyn also is it's very much melting pot of cultures across the Caribbean for the most part. So it's not like
Haitian, Dominican, Barbados, Grenada, Jamaican, like it's all over the map.
Guyana,
Right,
Guyana,
right,
yeah. But I mean, obviously Trinidad sort of dominates because that's what it's modeled on, and
right.
that's what much of Waiatka in general is based on Trinidad Carnival. Um, but I do like how multicultural it is, Caribbean speaking, or in terms of the Caribbean. Um, but it's also really accessible. You know, I mean, anyone can walk into a pan yard in Brooklyn and just listen to a band. And people don't understand that because a steel band is such a social thing. It's such a community thing that, you know, like take for instance Despers USA. One of, I think, the only band now left in Crown Heights. I mean, it used to be Crown Heights had Despers, Sonatas, Harmony, and now it's just Despers alone. And our pan yard is situated right next to a hipster bar, for lack of a better word. Um, I mean, people will walk by the yard while we're practicing, like, they're like, what the fuck is it? Like, wide-eyed. They're just blown away. And generally, like, some old-timers just in the yard rhyming and drinking will say, hey, come on in, come on in, come on in. And they'll come in and, like, feel like they've entered Narnia, like they've entered the secret world,
Yeah,
which it is. I mean,
it
come on.
is. Yeah,
When you're in the middle of a big city, you don't expect to just walk by a vacant lot and see something like that. And to me, it's really gratifying to see that. Just to see someone who might know nothing about this just be welcomed in, walk to the bar, buy a Corona for $5, sit there, listen to the music, and then go on their way. I think that's great. I think that's awesome. And, you know, Brooklyn is really unique for that. One of the millions of things that makes New York City unique, and I hope can continue, is that sort of thing.
Well, I saw, I think it was Jelani posted something on Facebook that it was just like a pile of money. And it was like, if you found this outside of a bank, what would you do? Or something, you know, and like, would you return it? And I was just like, and it was something like $100 million. And I just said, like, well, I would figure out how much it costs. I would figure out every steel band in Brooklyn and New Jersey and Philadelphia, figure out what it would cost to buy their pan yards outright. And I would just do that. And then the rest of it, I would, you know, I'd buy a car or a boat or whatever. Like, I'd do all the selfish things that we all want to do with, you know, if we had $100 million. But the first thing I would do is alleviate the real estate crunch for all these pan yards. Because, you know, gentrification is one thing, but there's also the sort of it's interesting. You know, anybody named Karen, I feel terrible for these days. But there's been a phenomenon of people calling for noise complaints.
Oh, yeah.
Calling these steel bands, and it's like, if you can call and you can convince that whoever is renting it is being a nuisance, you know, you're renting to these bands and it's a nuisance to the neighborhood. It's like, well, I'm sorry, if Cassim owned that lot, yeah, you'd have to deal with noise complaints, but Cassim is the landlord, not me. You know, not somebody else. And yeah, sure, we'll figure it out. We'll shut down before 10, but this is our yard. Right. You know, like, I feel like a little bit of ownership in terms of advocacy. Like, to me, that's like if I had $1 billion I didn't know what to do with. Or Jeff Bezos was like, all right, you can have $3 billion. What do you just do whatever you want with it? I'd be like, first order of business is get these bands real estate, because
absolutely
virtual Zoom steel bands are awesome. They're fun. We're all trying to figure it out. The Panorama J on Zoom is amazing. All of that is totally rad. But if we don't figure that out, then the gentrification thing is next, and that's going to blow it all. I mean, so for you, just to wrap up, for you, I mean, because you live in Brooklyn. And you're more involved with the pan scene, just objectively speaking, than I am on a daily basis. What do you on the ground? What do you see as, like, I just listed what I felt was an important thing. What do you see as, like, if you had $100 million, Noah Smit, what would you do with it?
The same thing you just said. I would buy everybody their own piece of land to practice in. I would take care of my band first, naturally.
Fair enough.
Because we're all suffering. Everybody is suffering. Doesn't matter if you're 15 people or 150. Yeah. Everyone's struggling in a steel band. You know, you can't just go to Sweatbox our sweatshop rehearsal studio in Greenpoint or Bushwick, for panorama practice. That's not going to work, you know. Um,
Well, because the truth, all joking aside, the truth is a lot of these bands do year. I mean, stage side stuff is year round, and a lot of them
right.
have educational programs they run. So it's not just Panyards so that we can rehearse Panorama, which is like the big runway show of the year. But there's a
Yeah.
million other things that go on that service the community and students on a yearly basis.
And it's a great asset to the community. I just wish people recognized, and by people I mean the Karens you speak of and so forth, or as I call them, the Kathleen's in Desper's case.
Yeah, I know. I wish
Um,
poor. I generally, I genuinely feel bad for anyone. I mean, poor Kathleen. I mean, well, not poor Kathleen. I know of the Kathleen of which you speak, but Karen's got a bad rap.
yeah, hard for the Karens,
Hard
but
hard time to be a Karen.
but it serves such a great service to the community. Just free musical education for kids. Free team building, learning how to work with others, as you say. It I don't know. There's just so much about steel band that makes you want to love it. I can't see how someone other than the noise would want to complain to the police all the time. And to those who are bothered by the noise, well, I hope they enjoyed all the fireworks we had for the past 2 months straight. So,
It has been. Listen, I think we're getting into the territory of like any example we have is like the only other response is irrational, sort of like. Dude, 2020 has been insane. So I think, yeah, I mean, we can complain about noise, but I saw some videos of like Crown Heights that looked like Fallujah, Iraq, with just like people running around with Roman candles, shooting them at each
shooting
other,
each
like
other. It was
for
crazy.
for
And I'm like,
months,
I'm
for
like,
like two
I'm like,
months.
I'm like, am I now like paying for all those nights that I've been the noisy one in the neighborhood?
Yeah,
People hearing my snare drum 4 blocks away. Like,
yeah, it does put some things in perspective. You do have a little bit like the moments when I was here. I live in Connecticut. It's not like the fireworks have been bad here, but they're mostly like the occasional like oh, poosh, like somebody just launches
right,
off
right,
a big M80 or whatever. And I'm here. I'm just so indignant. I'm like, oh, it's 9 p.m. How dare they, my dogs? Meanwhile, any other normal year, I'm in Brooklyn. Like, there's apartment buildings right here, and I'm just like, louder,
right,
louder.
right, 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 right.
This is culture.
But
So I have hypocrisies too, but I think they're worth it.
well, I'd say a steel band is a bit more constructive than randomly blowing shit up.
I stand
It's
by that. I agree with you 100%. Just for the record, I want that to be clear. I do.
all right as long as we're clear.
Well, no, I think this is a good time to put a button on this.
Cool.
I appreciate your time, and I know we went back and forth a bit about. I felt like I had to sell you on coming on Zoom here, but I'm glad we did it.
Not at all. I mean, Zoom
Oh
is for
man.
work. It's for work, So I guess it has that stink to it. But this is great.
Well,
This was
I'm
good.
I'm grateful to have gotten to speak with you. I mean, the odd thing I will say, if you want to look at a silver lining here, is like we've crossed paths for let's say at minimum a decade, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
said 2 minutes worth of material to you. And thanks to the pandemic and to Zoom, here we are, an hour and 10 minutes in, Noah. So were it not for the pandemic and for Zoom, you and I may not have connected on this intensive a level. So I'm grateful.
Yeah. Instead, I would just be seeing you at Panorama and saying "Go Tribe" and taking our annual picture together or whatever.
Our annual like go Cleveland sports, and then we'll
Yeah.
just go our separate ways. Well, no longer, Noah. We don't have to do that anymore. We can do
Cool,
them both.
man.
We can do all of it. But well,
Right.
tell. Thank you for your time. Is there any place where folks could look up more about what you're doing, and does Despers have a Facebook page where folks can see what they're up to?
I think Desper's Facebook page is Desper's US Steel, I think is the name of it.
Okay.
And then, well, I only work with them in the summers. I have a stage side, which is actually a new band. We haven't dropped our identity yet, so that's still
Okay.
kind of in the ether.
Fair
Uh,
enough. Well,
our
maybe
plan
we
was
can come back on whenever you guys are officially in the world.
for sure, for sure. Our plan was to actually drop it at the concert we were supposed to do together in May, but
Yes.
thanks, COVID.
We
But
will listen. I have put a pin in that. It's not going anywhere. The minute we're back in person, we are going to pretend it's 2019 or 2020, and it's going to be. We'll make it happen. Don't you worry. I am committing to you right now here that we're gonna blow the roof off a low theater at NYU
Good. I'll tell Mark.
whenever we whenever it's safe to. I don't want to get. Listen. I love Mark Brooks's music as much as the next person. I don't love it enough to put anybody in harm's way.
Oh, yeah.
So what? And I don't even think Mark does. Well, maybe Mark loves his music enough, but I would. Whenever we can do it, it'll be well worth it actually. So.
Awesome.
Well,
Can't wait. I can't wait.
tell Sparkle I said hello. I don't know her as well as I'd like to, but pass on a hello from me. And I've really enjoyed this, Noah. Thank you for your time.
For sure, man. I will. I'll do that.
All right, take it easy, buddy.
Later.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that chat. This podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum. LiquidDrum.com down in Waco, Texas. LiquidDrum.com. Check them out. Hilarious percussion videos, great content. You won't regret it. Also, Kyle Dunleavy. DunleavyPans.com. DUNLEAVY Pans.com down in Philadelphia. Kyle makes and builds all the steel drums I teach on and perform on, and so percussion. And he's an amazing guy, reliable, nice, and a really good tuner. So check him out, DunleavyPans.com. Also, if you are into steel drums at all, and advocacy and education, check out paninmotion.com. They're an organization based in Brooklyn. A bunch of my good friends run this advocacy organization, paninmotion.com. Check them out. Finally, if you like steel pan related merch and you just want awesome looking shirts to wear around to support the cause and support a Brooklyn based business, check out Alejandro Mirage's company called Mango Chow Clothing. You can look him up and his work on at mangochowclothing.com. I have a bunch of his shirts and they are super comfortable and beautiful looking, so check him out, mangochowclothing.com. All right, hope you're all doing well, and we'll talk to you soon.